Hey guys, it's Hannah, and today I'm coming to you with a very long overdue book review, and that is my review for Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. If you've been watching my videos for the past few months, then you probably know that I have fallen completely in love with this book. I've been saying that I want to review it ever since I read it, but I read it back in October, and clearly I still haven't reviewed it until now. I've tried to do it. I've filmed about like 4 different reviews, and I haven't liked any of them, and it's just been really difficult for me to talk about this book, which is why it's taken me so long to do this. But I feel like I'm at a point where I've spent enough time away from this book that I can now talk about it a bit more objectively and get through this review without crying. Fingers crossed. I can't make any promises though. Just to give you a general synopsis, if you don't know what this book is about, it follows the story of this girl named Asa Holmes who struggles with OCD and an anxiety disorder. The surface plot of the book, though, follows Asa as she reconnects with one of her old childhood friends, Davis Pickett, and Davis is the son of this billionaire named Russell Pickett who has recently gone missing. And now there's a $100,000 reward for anyone who has any information on Russell Pickett, and Asa and her friend Daisy are kind of after this reward, so that's kind of their incentive to go and talk to Davis. But like I said, that's just the surface plot. The actual story is about Asa as she is struggling with and learning to live with her mental illness. I do want to make it very clear that this book is very difficult to read if you also struggle with a mental illness. I'm sure that if you don't, it's also probably pretty difficult to read, because this book is just you inside of Asa's head as she is struggling with the worst of her mental health. And it's very hard to read that sometimes, especially when you're also someone who struggles with a mental illness. I personally have an anxiety disorder, and it's something that affects my day-to-day life. It's a very significant part of my life, and it's very severe at times. So reading this book, I've described it like this several times, but this book kind of feels like you're in the middle of a panic attack. If you know what a panic attack feels like, then you know exactly what I'm saying. But if you don't know what that feels like, at least for me personally, it's kind of like every thought in your brain is scattered, but they're all going off at the same time, so you're suddenly feeling everything all at once, and you can't really breathe, you can't really function, and you can't do much of anything, and it's a very intense feeling, and it's just a lot to deal with. And this book made me feel that way while I was reading it. I know a lot of people have critiqued it for that. A lot of people don't like that it made them feel that way while they were reading it, which is completely justified. Like, I completely understand that. I didn't like that feeling, but for me personally, I needed this book when I read it, so I actually liked the fact that I felt that way while I was reading it. Like I said, even though the summary tells us that it's about this missing billionaire and this girl named Asa reconnecting with a friend, that's not what the book is about. That is 100% a subplot to the main plot of being inside of Asa's head as she struggles with a mental illness. So I just wanted to make that very clear, because I feel like sometimes the summary of this book is a little bit misleading and it doesn't give you exactly what I think it should give you before you go into this. That's all I can really say for kind of objective thoughts on this book and just kind of the summary of it. Apart from that, I don't really know how to structure this review because I have a really difficult time talking about this book objectively. Like I mentioned, I tried to film this review 4 different times, and none of those times worked out because I have such an emotional connection to this book. And it's really difficult for me to separate that from what I objectively think about how good the writing was, or the plot development, or the character development was. And in my past reviews, I tried to do that, but in this one, I really don't think I want to, and I don't think I can. So the way I think I'm gonna kind of structure this is by talking about why this book has meant so much to me. I'm not gonna go into any specific spoilers for the plot of the book or anything that'll give anything away. I am just going to talk about what this book has meant to me, why it has meant so much to me, and why I think it's an important book for a lot of people to read. So backstory on me, as well as my relationship with this book. Like I mentioned, I personally struggle with an anxiety disorder, as well as many other things that I don't want to go into in this video because I want to keep it relevant to the book. But just know that I do struggle with mental illness, and it's something that occupies my every thought. It's something that affects my day-to-day life. It's a very significant part of my life, and it's something that I am working through. But back in October, when I first read this book, it was pretty much the worst I had been in a very long time, if not the worst I had ever been in terms of my mental health. Despite the fact that externally amazing things were happening in my life, internally I was struggling immensely, and I had gotten to a very dark place. And that month in October, I decided to pick up Turtles All the Way Down because I'd been hearing so many people talk about it, even though I had no intention of reading this book because I'd read The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I enjoyed that when I first read it, but I hadn't really gotten into any of his other books, so I didn't think I would want to read this one. But then the hype came out and I felt like I was being left out of knowing what this was about. And so I decided I'd give it a try and I'd see what I think. And so I was actually on a plane ride coming back home from a trip that I was on, and I downloaded the audiobook and I listened to the audiobook on my whole plane ride home. And I was in tears from beginning to end. I'm 100% certain that the person who was sitting next to me thought that I was crazy or thought that I was going through some very serious like heartbreak or someone in my family had died or something, because I was just complete waterworks. Like, I was sobbing the entire plane ride. And so I feel very bad for the person who was sitting next to me, because they definitely thought that I was just like a complete mess. And I was a complete mess, but it was because I was reading a book. But nonetheless, I finished the book on my plane ride, actually on my Uber ride back to my apartment, and then I finished it. I got to my apartment, dropped off my bags and my luggage, ran to the bookstore across the street from my apartment, bought a copy of the book, ran back home, sat down and reread the whole book that same night. And then I went back through and I started like tabbing all of the pages, my favorite quotes and passages. And then I like told everyone that they had to read it. And I just fell completely in love, because I do not even know how to describe how much this book affected me. So like I mentioned, that month I was going through like the worst of my mental health. Like, it was just so bad. And because of that, I think reading this book at the time that I did, despite the fact that it's extremely difficult to read, and I genuinely wouldn't really recommend it if you're going through a really difficult time with your mental health, because it can be so intense. But for me personally, I needed this. Like, I needed the intensity that this book provides and the descriptions that it provides about mental illness and the things that Aza goes through in here. I needed them when I read it. And I can't describe like how comforting this book was to me, even though it made me feel like I was just reliving a panic attack. I think that's where I see so much of the beauty in this, is that it was able to make me feel hopeful and comforted and understood, while also making me feel extremely uncomfortable and stressed and panicky and anxious. And I don't know how it managed to do that, but it did, and nothing has ever made me feel that way. And I just find that completely incredible. That was the thing about this book for me. It's that it made me feel understood in a way that no other book has ever made me feel. In terms of my mental illness specifically, because I also struggle with anxiety and Aza struggles with anxiety. So the way that John Green writes about anxiety, the way he writes about thought spirals, which was a concept I hadn't even really considered until I read it in here, and I realized that it's exactly the same thing that I do. Aza also obviously struggles with OCD, and since that's not something that I personally struggle with, I can't speak to how accurate or how well that representation is done, but John Green himself struggles with OCD and anxiety. This book is basically his own personal story written in a fictionalized novel, and so because of that, you can tell, like, you can just tell how personal this was to him. You can tell how much of himself he put in here, and because of that, because it's such a personal experience for him, he truly understands what mental illness feels like. At the time that I was reading this book, so many of my thoughts were just, I shouldn't be feeling like this, why am I feeling like this, you're wrong, you're crazy, you're ungrateful, just all of these terrible things that were occupying my every single thought. And Aza struggles with the exact same thing. She has these thought spirals, and the way that John Green writes about them is incredible, because it's exactly what it feels like. There are parts in this book where Aza is basically just arguing with her own mind, and then it just spirals down into this like terrible negativity, and it's exactly what it feels like. It's exactly what I've experienced in my life. It's so incredible to be able to read that, because it validates the way that you feel. Like, I had spent so much of that time doubting my own feelings, doubting my own mind, and more than just not understanding why I was feeling a certain way, not wanting to believe that I felt that way, and thinking that I shouldn't be feeling that way. So to then see Aza going through the exact same thing, doing the same thing, arguing with her own mind in a way that I have experienced to the most personal level, was just so incredible. It broke my heart. Like, I cried every single time I read it, and I still cry just like thinking about it, because despite despite the fact that I know that other people also experience this, it's different when you're inside the mind of a character and you're reading it in a book, which is a personal experience that you can't always experience just talking to someone else who understands that feeling. So to be as close as we possibly can in the mind of another person and know that they feel exactly what you feel. They feel the thoughts that you've been telling yourself that you're not allowed to feel, that you shouldn't be feeling. That makes you feel like you're not alone, and that's exactly what this book did for me. Of course, like I mentioned, I don't struggle with OCD, so the experiences that she has with OCD are not ones that I can speak to. They're ones that I did connect with on a deep level because some of the experiences are very similar to the way I feel when I have an anxiety attack or panic attack. But even despite the fact that I don't share that exact experience, the other thing that I think is so beautiful about this is that I think so many people will be able to relate to Aza's story, whether or not they struggle from a mental illness. I absolutely think that anyone who deals with mental health issues should give this book a try, but like I said, in a time where it's right for you, where you're comfortable reading it, where you know that it's not going to affect you in a negative way. But I also think anyone who doesn't struggle with a mental illness needs to read this book, because I think this is the closest thing you will ever get to understanding what it's like to be in the mind of someone and to experience what someone who deals with mental illness is experiencing. Of course, no one will be able to truly understand unless they actually experience something for themselves, but this book I think will absolutely help you get as close as you possibly can to understanding and will definitely help you to empathize. I think one of the biggest things around the stigma of mental illness is that so many people who don't struggle with it don't understand what it feels like. They don't understand, and it's like impossible to describe to someone what it feels like. And John Green did. He truly, truly did. I don't know how he was able to do it in such a real and raw way, but he did it. And that's why I think that so many people need to read this, because truly I think that reading this will help you to understand that as much as you can, and will definitely help you to understand the people in your own life who may be struggling with mental illness. And I know anyone who struggles with a mental illness, what a lot of us just want is for someone to understand and accept the way that we're feeling, especially when we don't understand and accept the way that we're feeling. And that's a very hard thing to grapple with. So maybe in a slightly more objective sense, as objective as I can be about this book, I think that that's one of the greatest things that this book has to offer, the fact that it can help so many people to understand and empathize. Another thing I truly loved about this book was the fact that Aza goes to therapy, and she consistently goes to therapy throughout this book because she's been struggling with her mental illness for so long, and it's affected so much of her life. So she's been in therapy for a very long time, and I really liked the way that this book portrayed that. As someone who has gone to therapy before, I really, really loved getting to see that representation in here, getting to see that relationship in here, because she has a very, very conflicted relationship, specifically when it comes to medication. And a few people have critiqued this book for her attitude towards medication, because Aza definitely rejects it. She doesn't want to be taking her medication, even though she really should be. But the book doesn't portray taking medication for mental illness in a negative light by any means. Her therapist is absolutely encouraging her to do so because she needs it, not because she's trying to push it on her. And Aza ultimately does realize that it is something that she personally needs, not necessarily something that everyone will need. And this book comments on that a lot, and I really loved the way that it did so. I also really loved the characters in this book. A lot of people also didn't really like the characters, but I really liked them. I thought that they were so real and just honest, and they felt like real people I could have had in my life. My one critique I will say is that Daisy is a bit on the eccentric side, bordering on kind of unrealistic in terms of a character, and she's not really the greatest friend. But I also did like the fact that she wasn't the greatest friend, because nobody is perfect, and not everyone's gonna have the perfect best friend who's their perfect moral support system. So I did enjoy that, because I found that to be realistic. Like, I'm grateful and happy in my life that I have so many amazing supportive friends, but I know that that's not something that everyone has in terms of people who can support their mental illness. And she also has an amazing mother who's extremely supportive of her as well. And I loved getting to have a parental figure in a YA novel who's there constantly. She's present and she takes care of her and she's supportive of her daughter. And that was just amazing to see in this book as well. And then we have the relationship with Aza and Davis, and their relationship I thought was honestly like pretty insignificant to the book, but needed to be there. It's not like it's a romance that like cures her mental illness. This is not one of those stories at all. Like I said, their relationship, platonic or romantic, whatever, is not a significant part of the story. Like it's not what's driving this story. It's a subplot to the story that could have not been in here, and I think ultimately the book would have been the same, but I actually did like the addition of it. I liked the fact that she becomes friends with him again and that she meets him after several years of not seeing him, and getting to see how like just the little things in our life also affect the bigger picture that's in our head. So yeah, those are kind of just like my thoughts on this and how this book has affected me and why it means so much and why I think it's so good and important. Like I said, I can't be fully objective about this book because it's been such an emotional read for me and it's meant so much to me in such a personal way. So I will just say, like, be wary of that when you're taking my review into account. Like, I definitely know that I have very strong feelings about this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars because I love it so much because of what it's meant to me in a personal sense. So I know everyone else is not going to experience the same thing, but nonetheless, I do think that when a book can have that sort of personal impact on you, that speaks for itself. But before I wrap this review up, I did kind of want to go through a few of the quotes that I have tabbed in here, just like some of my favorite ones, and read them all to you. None of them are going to be like spoilery or anything. It's just going to be some of the ones that have meant the most to me, and one that I'm actually considering getting a tattoo of. I feel like the best way to get a sense of what this book kind of feels like and what this book is all about is to just read a few of the quotes, because John Green's writing is exceptional and he just has a way with words, and there are so many one-liners in here that I think about every single day and I quote them all the time because they've just had such an impact on me. And I think to give you guys like a sense of what this book really feels like, I want to go through a few of my favorites and just read them to you. I wanted to tell her that I was getting better because that was supposed to be the narrative of illness. It was a hurdle you jumped over or a battle you won. Illness is a story told in the past tense. True terror isn't being scared. It's not having a choice in the matter. Just be honest with Dr. Singh today, okay? There's no need to suffer, which I'd argue is just a fundamental misunderstanding of the human predicament, but okay. One of the challenges with pain, physical or psychic, is that we really only approach it through metaphor. It can't be represented in the way a table or a body can. In some ways, pain is the opposite of language. And even though I laughed with them, it felt like I was watching the whole thing from somewhere else, like I was watching a movie about my life instead of living it. And if you can't pick what you do or think about, then maybe you aren't really real, you know? Maybe I'm just a lie that I'm whispering to myself. Thoughts are only thoughts. They are not you. You belong to yourself, even when your thoughts don't. You think. It's like a brain fire, like a rodent gnawing at you from inside, a knife in your gut, a spiral, a whirlpool, black hole. The words used to describe it, fear, despair, anxiety, obsession, do so little to communicate it. Maybe we invented metaphor as a response to pain. Maybe we needed to give shape to the opaque, deep-down pain that evades both sense and senses. Do you feel like you're getting better? Everyone wanted me to tell them that story. Darkness to light, weakness to strength, broken to whole. I wanted it too. You're everything, everything, everything. And I felt like I was. You're both the fire and the water that extinguishes it. You're the narrator, the protagonist, and the sidekick. You're the storyteller and the story told. You are somebody's something, but you are also your you. That one seriously gives me chills. You pick your endings and your beginnings. You get to pick the frame, you know? Maybe you don't choose what the picture is, but you decide on the frame. Spirals grow infinitely small the further you follow them inward, but they also grow infinitely large the further you follow them out. And my favorite quote from the entire book, your now is not your forever. So there you have it. Those are some of my favorite quotes and passages from the entire book. There are several more. I clearly did not read all of them to you, but some of them are kind of spoilery. Some of them won't really make sense unless you have the context. But yeah, I adore this book. If you couldn't tell from the rest of this video, it has meant everything to me. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I highly, highly recommend that you pick this book up and give it a try. I'm honestly impressed that I was able to get through this entire video without crying. There were some teary-eyed moments that I had to pause for a minute, but I'm happy that I know that I've gotten to the place where I can talk about this without breaking down. But there you all have it. That is my review of Turtles All the Way Down by John Green. I know this video was a long time coming. I'm very sorry that it took me so long to film it, but I hope it was worth waiting for. Because this video deals with such a heavy topics, I'm gonna leave some links to some resources in the description box. If you are struggling with a mental illness, if you need any help, please seek out that help. please know that you are not alone, you are loved, and there are people who are there for you. If you want to discuss the book with me, please feel free to do so in the comments down below. I would love to talk about this book with you all because, as you all know, I clearly love it so much, so I could talk about it endlessly. If you would like to follow me on any of my social media, talk to me about this book or any other book anywhere else, all of my links are in the description box as always. But thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!